I'm Michael Martinez, and you're about to listen to an AI generated discussion of my article, How Was Beleriand Destroyed in the War of Wrath? I've often been asked to speculate about how Tolkien might have imagined this war unfolding. It was an article that I long put off writing because I just didn't feel comfortable actually speculating. But after receiving the request several times in a row, I decided to just go ahead and plunge in. So you'll find that the AI hosts are taking a few liberties with pronouncing some of the words and things. I decided not to try and correct them this time.
Imagine this, a huge landmass, entire kingdoms just gone, vanished into the sea. How does something like that even happen? Especially when it's tied to like one of the biggest conflicts in a whole fantasy world. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a really epic, but maybe often misunderstood event from Tolkien's Middle-earth. We're talking about the destruction of Beleriand during the War of Wrath. We're going to unpack some common ideas about it, explore the just mind-boggling power involved, and we'll be looking at it through the lens of a great article from the Middle-earth blog by Michael Martinez.
Right. And our mission for you, the listener, is to really get a handle on not just what happened to Beleriand, but how. How could such a massive place basically just
Yeah.
succumb, in only a few decades? And Michael Martinez offers some pretty surprising insights into this huge but kind of vaguely described conflict. So
Yeah.
get ready to maybe shift how you think about one of fantasy's biggest cataclysms. See the first age a bit differently.
Okay, let's jump right in. There's this huge misconception, right? When we hear Beleriand, I think a lot of us, me included, just picture total annihilation, like completely gone,
Right.
swallowed by the ocean, no trace left. But Michael Martinez, in his article, he opens with this fantastic twist. And it actually made me smile because it paraphrases that line from The Princess Bride.
Exactly. He
Yeah.
says Beleriand was only mostly destroyed, not all destroyed. And like he points out with that quote, there's a huge difference there. What's really fascinating is that even after this, cataclysmic event, big chunks of that ancient land actually survived. It kept existing right into the second and third ages. It wasn't just like theoretical.
Oh, really? Actual places?
Yeah, tangible areas that were still important, like Linden, that became a key elven place on the new coast. And it was basically what used to be Osirian, that green land with the seven rivers.
Okay.
Then you've got Tol Morwen. That was a piece of the old forest of Brethil where Turin's family was buried.
Right, right.
There's Tolfwyn, which was part of Dorthonion before, that highland area. And Tolhimring, too, where Madros had his big fortress. That's somehow stuck around.
Wow.
Martinez mentions a few other unnamed islands, too. So if you connect the dots, it points to a destruction that was, well, selective, or at least incomplete. It left these pockets of land that shaped Middle-earth's history later on. Not a clean sweep at all, more like a fractured survival.
That detail is so important. It totally changes the mental map of what happened. I always pictured this like one big flood event, but this sounds way more complex. And speaking of changing how we see things, another big misunderstanding Martinez talks about is the idea that the War of Wrath itself was like quick. One decisive battle, maybe over in a couple of days.
Yeah, which raises a really important question for us. If it wasn't just one quick fight, how long did this massive war actually go on for? And the article gives us an answer that's pretty surprising for, a fantasy world conflict of this scale. The war itself lasted for many years, specifically from first age year 545 all the way to 587.
Wait, 545 to 587, that's
42 years. 42 years! Wow! Okay, that completely changes things. I always imagined something much shorter, more explosive.
exactly. Think about a war lasting over 4 decades.
What kind of sustained effort would that take? It wasn't just a quick strike then.
No, not at all. It started when the host of Valinor arrived on the Teleri ships. And while, yeah, the details are a bit scarce, we know that over this long period, major strongholds held by Morgoth, they were systematically taken down, destroyed. Martinez points to texts confirming cities like Brithumbar and Eglarest, which the orcs had held since the Nirnaeth Arnúdiad, were eventually seized.
So methodical, grinding warfare over decades.
Pretty much. And the scale of who was involved is also a big deal. It wasn't just the Valar Maiar. The host of Valinor included elves, men, and dwarves who joined them.
Okay.
We know many of the Edain, the men who'd been enslaved up in Hithlum, were freed and then actually joined the host.
And even Elrond and Elros, and the sons of Arendil and Elwing, they joined the host too. That was a big moment for them, which is extra interesting because they'd been living with Maedhros and Maglor, the last Fëanorians, who specifically did not join the war. They stayed out of it because of their oath.
Right, the Oath of Fëanor.
So it paints this picture of a really complex, evolving war zone.
Yeah.
Different groups moving around over decades, not just one big static fight. It really was like a world war for that age.
That's fascinating. But it still raises the question, even with powerful elves and men fighting for decades, it's hard to imagine them being able to, drown a whole continent, including mountains like the Eared Weatherinn or even Thangordrum itself. And they didn't have the Rings of Power yet, right? That was way later.
1,000 years later, yeah.
So if it wasn't just elves and men, who or what was powerful enough to cause that kind of geological chaos, to make Beleriand sink?
And that's where you get into the really primordial power. The other forces Tolkien talks about, way beyond what mortals or even elves could do. On Morgoth's side, remember, even after all that time, he still had Balrogs.
Fallen Maiar, right?
Exactly, fallen Maiar. Beings of immense ancient power, basically corrupted demigods. And then at the very end, remember, he unleashed the winged dragons. That was like his ultimate terrifying trump card.
And Calagon the Black.
The biggest, mightiest dragon ever. And Calagon was so incredibly powerful that when Arendelle finally killed him in their aerial battle, his fall, just his dead body falling, supposedly broke Thangorodrim, or at least one of its peaks, and ruined Angband.
Just his fall did that. Wow.
Yeah, that one event shows a level of destructive power far beyond anything elves or men could manage. It suggests Morgoth had forces capable of literally tearing up the landscape.
Okay, so Morgoth had Balrogs, dragons, immense power on his side. What about the forces of Valinor? What were they bringing to the table?
Well, Martinez highlights their commander, Ianwe. He was a Maiar, one of the most powerful Maiar, Manwë's own herald.
A major player.
A huge player. And it's not just him. It's totally reasonable to think some of the Valar themselves, the godlike beings who shaped the world, were actually there. Martinez suggests folks like Tulkas, the warrior Valar, or Oromi, the hunter. They'd absolutely want to be in on taking down Morgoth.
Makes sense.
Ollie, too, the master smith who knows the earth. Maybe him.
Yeah.
And they all had their own Maiar followers. Like Sauron used to be one of Ollie's Maiar. These beings have just immense, almost divine power. When they fight, the world itself probably feels it, like cosmic punches reshaping the land.
Okay, so you've got these incredibly powerful beings on both sides. Valar, Maiar, Balrogs, dragons.
Right.
Suddenly that 42-year duration for the war starts to make a lot more sense, doesn't it?
It really does. Martinez suggests the destruction of the land wasn't just, collateral damage from armies fighting. It might have been a direct result of these extended exchanges of power between the godlike beings. Like imagine their battles literally ripping up hills, tearing mountains apart, opening huge cracks in the earth, just like some texts hint at.
So not just swords and arrows, primordial forces clashing, like the world being reshaped again.
Exactly. Almost like the music of the Ainur happening again, but this time as a destructive conflict on the ground.
Now, here's where Martinez gets really interesting for me. He doesn't just say these powerful beings were fighting. He proposes the War of Wrath was fought on maybe 3 different levels at the same time.
Yeah, 3 levels.
That's not something I'd really considered before. Can you kind of break down what he means by these levels?
Sure. Martinez lays it out pretty clearly. Level 1 is the kind of war we usually picture. Armies of elves, men, dwarves, fighting Morgoth's huge armies of orcs, trolls, and those Easterlings who joined him. That's the ground war, the front lines.
Okay, standard fantasy battle stuff.
Right. Then level 2, Martinez suggests, involves Morgoth's really big monsters. Think about dragons like Glaurung, maybe wingless ones early on, but also those terrifying werewolves, the shadow vampires like Suringwethel, the wargs.
Yeah.
These guys would be facing off against the most powerful elves in the host. Heroes like Glorfindel, maybe. And crucially, the lesser Maiar who came with Ainwe. This is a higher tier of combat, almost supernatural beings fighting.
Okay, so armies, then monsters versus heroes, and lesser Maiar. What's the third level?
The third level is the top tier, the most profound, the most destructive. This would involve Morgoth's greatest servants, his Maiar. Maiar who fell to his side, powerful enough to actually fight the Maiar of Valinor, maybe even some of the Valar themselves directly.
Seriously, like a Maiar versus Maiar.
Yeah, these top-level fighters, maybe boosted by Morgoth's own power that he had poured into the world, especially into Beleriand. They might have even used the land itself as a weapon, twisting it, breaking it against their enemies, like wielding the substance of Arda itself.
That's an incredible concept, seeing the war layered like that. 3 levels of power escalating. But, for listeners maybe wondering, does Martinez have strong text evidence for this? Or is it more like a theory he built to make sense of it all? And the other big question, if the Valar were so powerful, why take 42 years? Why didn't they just, stomp Morgoth out in a week? And why did parts of Beleriand survive?
Excellent questions. And Martinez tackles that directly. He basically infers that the Valar probably held back strategically. They weren't just rampaging forces, right? They wouldn't want to just crush everything, including innocent lives or their own allies.
Yeah.
The elves, men, dwarves fighting with them.
So restraint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That restraint could explain why it took so long and why some areas survived. He even speculates they might have done some kind of temporary engineering, maybe shoring up land, calming the chaos from the big power clashes to make sure their allies could actually survive and keep advancing through this devastated landscape.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that strategic restraint also gives a really good reason for why parts of Beleriand did survive. Maybe the Valar deliberately set up or reinforced certain areas as refuges during the fighting, like bases to operate from while protecting people.
So it was a war of liberation, not just pure destruction.
That seems to be the idea.
So the Valar's incredible power, ironically, might be why the war took so long and why bits survived. That totally flips the usual thinking. Okay, what about the aftermath? Martinez suggests a lot of the sinking, the big destruction, might have happened after the main fighting stopped. Like the land was just reeling from aftershocks, natural disasters caused by unleashing all that power.
Yeah, that's part of his thinking.
I can almost picture the host of Valinor pushing forward and maybe the sea just rushing in behind them as Morgoth's power over the land broke. It sounds like fighting on constantly shifting, collapsing ground, like a minefield where the mines keep moving.
And if you connect that to the bigger picture, think about Ulmo, the Valar of the Sea. He and his servants could have played a huge, maybe unseen role in the destruction. We know Morgoth's forces hated and feared the sea, right? They never went on it. Ulmo might have been actively carving up Beleriand, using his power over water to make barriers against Morgoth's forces, literally plowing channels through the land.
Wow, like directed erosion?
Maybe. And those channels wouldn't just block Morgoth's armies. They'd let the Teleri ships move fighters around, and maybe more importantly, rescue refugees.
So the sea wasn't passive, it was an active participant, maybe even a weapon.
It fits Tolkien's world, where the elements themselves are almost characters. The sea wasn't just rising, perhaps it was being guided.
That adds another layer entirely. And Martinez even brings up something I bet a lot of fans have thought about. The idea of the Teleri elves just sitting on their ships for 40 years is, well, kind of boring, isn't it?
Yeah, a bit anticlimactic for the great mariners.
So he speculates they could have been busy the whole time, maybe moving refugees.
Exactly. Moving people from really dangerous, devastated places like Hithlum to safer spots like the Isle of Belar or maybe Osiriand, which, as we said, became Lindon later.
That makes so much more sense. It gives them a vital, ongoing role throughout the whole long war, not just a taxi service at the beginning.
It's a practical, engaging idea, yeah. But ultimately, as Michael Martinez wraps up in his article, a lot of this is speculation, educated speculation, but still. Tolkien himself probably felt the War of Wrath was just too huge, too mythic to be described in plain, detailed words.
Like trying to describe a hurricane with just words.
Kind of.
Yeah.
The legendary feel would be lost with too much detail. Plus, the elves who stayed in Middle-earth mostly didn't fight in it. They were elsewhere or in hiding. And the Númenóreans, who might have had records, well, they later lost most of their history.
So the details just got lost to time and catastrophe.
Pretty much. The War of Wrath remains distant, immense, not fully documented, almost like the sheer power involved blurred the memory of it.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? It means the vagueness isn't some kind of plot hole or flaw in the lore. It's really an invitation. It leaves space for your own imagination. For fan fiction, for gaming, you get the freedom to imagine how that incredible war might have unfolded. It's honestly a testament to Tolkien's genius, isn't it? That even the gaps in his history are so rich with possibilities. They make you want to dive deeper. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the truly cataclysmic War of Wrath and the fate of Beleriand, especially with Michael Martinez's insights guiding us.
Absolutely. And remember, knowledge is great, but it's most valuable when you really think about it, understand it, maybe apply it. There's always more to learn. Keep asking questions. Keep exploring.
So here's something for you to think about as you ponder Middle-earth. What might the lasting effects be, ecologically, magically, from an event that shattered a continent, even if the books don't spell it all out? And how does Beleriand being mostly destroyed, with those bits surviving, actually ripple through Middle-earth's future, right down to the Third Age? Something to mull over as you continue your own deep dives.